So I just wanted to welcome everyone to our Thursday Lunch and Learn. Today we have a gentleman that I've had my eye on for quite some time. A guy by the name of Adam Martin, who runs the F5 project out of Fargo, but it's not just Fargo. It's actually, I believe, a statewide event. And Adam really focuses on, and Adam, please correct me if any of this is wrong. I think that Adam is the guy in the corner for people who don't have someone in their corner. Typically works a lot of felons, trying to reintroduce them, get them back on the right feet, on the right path to really succeed in society. So Adam, I hope that was a good enough intro. Can I just give it to you to tell me all the things I said wrong in my intro? You're like, Patrick, you were close, but not quite there.
Well, I'll be honest, I didn't hear it because I was messing with my speaker, but I'm sure you did an amazing job.
So tell me about F5. How did you ever get into this, and what does it do for those on the call that don't know?
Yeah, so the F5 project is it's a statewide organization now. So we have offices in Fargo, Grand Forks, Minot, Bismarck, Williston, a few other places. We have 31 staff and probably 300 clients, just specifically to people. We are doing one-on-one care with people in the community. And then we have 7 houses where we have we have 4 in the Fargo-Moorhead area, and then 1 in Grand Forks and 2 in Bismarck. And in those houses, we have about 45 people combined. So the way we got started was, well, I'm formerly incarcerated. I have 5 felonies on my record. I posted a meme the other day that my longest standing relationship is with the state of North Dakota. And so multiple probation officers, multiple jails, therapists, counselors, the whole works that you end up getting bombarded with in the system. Lost my kids, was homeless, didn't have, a secure place to live for probably 7 to 8 years straight. And granted, defined for me, homelessness was, sleeping on couches, or maybe I got a roommate for a month to live in the shelters, treatment centers. So I'm a product of the system from the time I was 13 until I was 30. I'm 40 years old now. So about 8 years ago, I got a job at a company in West Fargo, a tech company. I was 2 weeks sober. Was living on a couch of a guy who was also in recovery, and just started hustling, right? Like just selling computers and, helping people understand what data centers and wireless infrastructures were and stuff, and had no experience in sales prior to that. I think it was just kind of a natural, skill I learned over time being in the system, going from place to place to place and having to win people over with application processes and interviews and, stuff like that. So was there for about four years and became pretty successful. Made more money than I had ever made probably in my whole life combined prior to those 4 years. And was seeing a lot of the people that I used to hang out with, or people that were early in recovery or even long-term recovery, not leveling up or overdosing and dying or going to prison, having a hard time getting their kids back. And I was completely surrounded by people who were successful, work related. And I just didn't see any of my friends. So that's initially how I started F5. Was I just started letting guys who were in the jails or being released from, well, let me back up. We got into the jails. They started letting us go into the jails and talk to people and tell our stories. And then as people got released, I would let them sleep on my couch, and it was interesting because I'd have 2-3 guys sleeping in my, my 2-bedroom apartment that I was living in North Fargo. And my kids would be there on the weekends too. So it was just like, I went from just being like a tech sales guy to really having no real community responsibility, and then having my kids on the weekends to now people are in my house all the time, and it became like Grand Central Station. And granted, I had no intentions of doing anything beyond that, speaking at jails or schools, on the side, or the rotaries, just kind of telling my story. I had no intentions of leaving High Point Networks. And then it just kind of happened. Like it got to a point where I couldn't supply the demand with just a 2-bedroom apartment. And so I connected with some people in the community, and we started opening up houses. And then next thing I know, we're a nonprofit. And then 5 years later, we have 30 staff, 7 houses, and probably combined over 400 clients. We touch probably 5,000 people a year, between the prisons and the jails, and walk-ins and phone calls and stuff like that. But yeah, none of this was intended. We just kind of evolved with what the demand was and focused on helping people find jobs, reentry housing for people coming out of prison, jail, treatment centers, detoxes, hospitals, in regards to formerly incarcerated and addiction and mental health. And that's kind of, I guess that's F5 in a nutshell.
So let me ask you a strange question. I'm going to go the opposite way. You gave us a really good rundown on where you've came from, how you got to the point that you're at. Where do you see this going? What's the next 5 years? Do you have plans, or is this journey similar to mine, and you're just putting all you have into what you're doing day by day? There are some plans, but I mean, I'm on this wild ride that's just kind of taking me where I go, and I kind of see you in that similar experience as well.
Yeah, that's a really good job or question. In the past 5 years, we've really just evolved to what was in front of us. Now we're kind of on a path of, creating more quality services, right? Like that first couple of years, it was just kind of startup, wham bam, just show up everywhere and do whatever we can to just be helpful. And now we became a little more strategic with our time, where we definitely can't be all things to all people, right? Like I just don't, we are not, the one thing that I know that we're not good at is what the homeless shelters do. We're not very supportive when it comes to people who are chronically homeless and in severe mental health issues, or come from, severe traumatic, like domestic violent situations. We're good with, reentry housing with people who are coming out of prison. And I think partly the reason why is the vast majority of the people that work here at F5 are all formerly incarcerated, and had gone from job to job to job and dealt with those barriers of their felony background, or whatever the case may be. So I think what we're probably going to see is we're going to see an increase with us getting more into workforce development and partnering with businesses, and providing peer support for people who have mental health diagnoses, or they relapse while they have a job and they're trying to navigate treatments and stuff like that. Really, I mean, it's a nonprofit human services agency is what we've kind of became. What we're seeing is that we're kind of different, where we focus more on recovery and reform, right? As it regards to felony backgrounds or voting or criminal record seals or mugshot reform. Not a lot of recovery organizations are doing that. And so we're getting a lot of appeal to dive into Minnesota, in South Dakota. So I think if we do anything, I think we're just trying to figure out, like, if this is something that's like different and new and in changing lives and it's better, then how do we scale this to support more people of the same demographic that we serve, rather than trying to just open it up to, different demographics that we probably won't be as successful with. One other thing that we're going to focus on is we're having negotiations with Moorhead school districts, or the school system, to provide the same kind of care for people who have not entered the justice system. So I see that that could be that could complement each other of going up the river and working with kids, which we're already doing, where we take kids out to lunch or we go to the schools or we play basketball with them. And so I can see us, building out there probably in the next 5 years as well.
I think that's amazing that you're really looking at that proactive approach. Ultimately, I think that's, hopefully gonna create the most good for the most people if you can keep them out of the system. I know as a employer, I have seen several people that are stuck in that system, and I just can't believe how similar it is to quicksand. And once you're in, you don't have a license and you get a driving, under suspension, and it just seems like it's really hard to get out of that hole. So I'm glad that there's someone here helping people do that. I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of prior questions, but as we're talking, being a numbers guy myself, and thinking, holy moly, 35 people on payroll. I write payroll checks every 2 weeks. If it's all right, what's a funding mechanism for your organization? How do you, as a nonprofit, get that ball rolling and then keep it going?
Yeah, so we early on, I didn't want to deal with any grants or federal funding or state funding that was going to manipulate the way that we do things. I think that we have something special when it comes to not being licensed and not having degrees. And there are people that have those things here, but keeping it specific to like community peer support in all aspects, right? A lot of the people that work here would not be able to work for the state of North Dakota or the federal government or a lot of employers, right? Like they have dealt with those barriers for a long time and have not been able to like level up, break ceilings or even raise the foundation of their lives until they started working here, right? And so funding is interesting because we did sign some contracts with the state of North Dakota in regards to reentry support. It's Free Through Recovery and Community Connect. And I was very specific about if we're going to do this, there's got to be, the red tape's got to be to a minimum, and you have to let us do it the way that we're doing it. And the cool thing about it is we were already doing these programs before they turned them into programs. So they were basically essentially just going to pay us for what we were doing already. And so that's one aspect is we do, as long as it doesn't fall outside of the normal things that we do, we're willing to do, partner with the states or the cities or the counties or whatever to, do those general kind of peer support operation stuff. The other aspect is our housing component is not funded whatsoever for any kind of contracts or agency, or anything like that. North Dakota has a real issue with funding housing. So it's just, especially halfway housing, because, in our houses, nobody's, they're special. So there's not like leases being continuously signed or stuff like that. So it's, but even if there was, North Dakota is not very good at that, and they don't like funding housing. So we've had to look to monthly donors, major gift donors, or even, people who donate every once in a while, private donations to support the housing. So we just did our books. We're a $1.5 million operating company now. Payroll is, you're right. I think we pay pretty close to $80,000 a month in payroll between all the employees and contracted, workers, whether they're 1099 or a vendor of some sort. And so, yeah, it can, there's been months where we've had to take out a credit line just to, because the state of North Dakota didn't pay their bill on time. Like it's very important that everybody pays their bills on time or their invoices, because if they miss it 1 month, like we're in the hole $80,000, and then I got to front load that. And so, but we've been very specific to not use donations to pay for salaries. So we use, I would say about 60% of our income comes from the state contracts, and we try to ensure that those state contracts pay for all salaries, right? So they are specific to about 18 employees, but we make enough on them to be able to like run the operations. And then the donations that come in pay for the housing aspect of the organization, or the peer, youth peer support or peer supports, where we have people that come in that aren't on contracts or whatever the case may be. And that costs about 30 grand a month to run those operations. And so our fundraising goal is about 30,000 a month. And we hit somewhere between 17 to, some months giving Hearts Day, or when we have events, we'll bring in 75,000. So it evens out through the year. But the monthly donations of the guaranteed $25 a month per person has done amazingness for us to be able to like forecast and create some stability for our staff.
Well, thank you for going through that, and sorry for putting you on the spot talking about dollars like that. I'll tell you, I'm looking at your background and your hoodie, and I'll tell you, one of my favorite hoodies is my F5 hoodie. Stay humble, hustle hard. Love it. Love the saying. And I was wondering if you could kind of give a background to these sayings. I know a lot of times in your social, you talk about, ugly grace, which you're repping today. Can you kind of talk about ugly grace, stay humble, hustle hard? What are these things about?
Yeah, so that's so the hustle harder one is, if you search the internet, you'll probably see hustle hard. Like, there's not a lot of hustle harder. I think there might be a couple, but so in the recovery world, we have this saying where you don't quit 5 minutes, 5 minutes before the miracle happens, right? And so to me, hustle harder, that ER is that extra 5 minutes, right? Like, it's when everything, because you can be hustling hard and the shit's hitting the fan, you're losing your kids, the system's not doing you any favors, your child support's insane, to like, it's just, things suck, right? You talked about the quicksand earlier. I just listened to a voicemail that was recorded between a probation officer and a person that's on probation. And all was fine and dandy until the probation officer didn't think that they hung up the phone, and then they said some really nasty things. First, I want to say that that's probably not normal, but it exists in the system, right? There's some extreme biases. There's a big brother, little brother kind of mentality. It's very adversarial, the way the justice system is built. And so it can feel like you're in quicksand even when nothing's going wrong, right? Just because the amount of systematic trauma that you've dealt with through the years. My goal is that ER, that hustle harder, is another way of saying don't quit just yet. Wait one more day, right? Like, as long as you're willing to put in the effort and you stay sober and you keep an open mind, like we can travel this path, and you'll never have to deal with these things again, as long as you put in that little bit extra effort. So that's kind of where the hustle harder comes from. The ugly grace form is probably my flagship saying now, because everywhere I look, just like with the example that I used about the probation officer, right? Like, everyone is adversarial in some way or another, right? Everyone has, if we were to take everyone's judgments and apply them into a committee or a law or whatever, right? Like, and we had no process of like voting on it. Like, we just implement, I was like, all right, if a person wears hats, he's not allowed to come in. He's not allowed to come into the office. If a person doesn't wear a suit, he's not allowed to come onto the floor. Like, if we applied all of that, like, nobody would leave their house, right? And so my goal is that we all also have an idea of grace as well, right? I've seen people flip the switch when they talk about drug addicts, when their daughter becomes an addict, right? And so my goal with Ugly Grace is that the grace isn't for the person we're giving it to. It's meant for us to give it, right? And when we really give grace to people that we don't think is deserving, when we go outside of our subjective idea of what grace or who deserves grace, it feels ugly. It feels gross. Like, I don't want to give grace to that person because they did something that I think is absolutely wrong, right? Well, that idea is subjective too. And so the idea is just to look past what you think is right and wrong and just feel ugly for a little bit and give grace.
No, I love that. I'll tell you, I'm going to take a question from the chat box. Tracy Wilkie, thanks for coming. Tracy Wilkie asked, Adam, can you explain the lack of transitional housing in Minot? Are you familiar with that at all?
Yeah, I have a good idea of the environment of recovery housing in North Dakota. So there's a couple really good organizations. You know, F5, of course, does it. Hope Manor out of Bismarck does it. Redemption Road does a little bit of specific to like sex offenders for housing. And I think they open their doors for anybody, but they, you know, there's some in Moorhead. But in North Dakota, just like everything else, we're about 10 years behind when it comes to infrastructure needs for the people. And I mean, listen, I remember when I was in third grade and cherry Pepsi became a thing, and I saw it because somebody brought it back from Virginia. You know what I mean? And I didn't see it again in North Dakota for another 6 years. You know, so like the one of the biggest issues that we have is that we don't have enough people for people to like build a business around, right? You know, so if we can't do that, then nobody wants to do it because they're not going to make any money at it, right? And so we have to rely on people like Hope Manor is a person who's in recovery, right? Who probably could have used the services of Hope Manor when she first got sober. Redemption Road is ran by a guy who's formerly incarcerated. F5 Project is ran by a guy who is a product of the system and has 5 felonies. You know what I mean? So like until we can get to a point where the demand and the supply meet each other and people can benefit off building a business off of it, no one's going to do it except for the few that are passionate about it, right? That are willing not to make money, right? Or make a profit. And I think as long as we're in that world, you're probably going to see good quality, of the people who are doing it, good quality services, quality language of the heart, quality recovery, whatever. But in the same time, we're only going to be able to help a certain amount of people. I mean, between all those houses, there's probably 100 to 125 people that can be housed at any given time. North Dakota has, 28% of the population that have a criminal record. That's 238,000 people that have so Minot is one of those places that like is probably a desert. I mean, once you get past Bismarck, it's a desert for housing, right? There's a place out, I heard, in a couple places starting out in Watford City and Dickinson, and but even then they 6 maybe 10 beds for the whole city. So yeah, it's bad. I know that for F5, one of the plans that we have is to I don't think we're going to go in and just create something, but I think as people decide they want to go into this world, we're going to be of service and beneficial, and maybe even have talks about a legit partnership where we're on the same books and stuff like that, and help run admin. But it takes a lot of money to just go start something up.
Absolutely does. Adam, I want to tell a quick story. The first time I met you, you had come out during this last session to provide testimony on criminal justice reform, and I had testimony there, but the rules for giving it because of COVID had changed, and I was very regretful that I didn't get to stand up and testify this last session. Can you kind of talk about your efforts into criminal justice reform, whether it's mugshot or bail hearings, or every time I see one of your posts about these issues, there's nothing that I can poke a hole in it. It's all just very common sense to me. It's like, yeah, we should of course not have a mugshot in the front page of the Fargo Forum before someone is convicted of a crime, and it's absolutely ridiculous. So can you kind of talk about that for everyone for a minute?
Yeah, I would like to say that, like, I think that the reason that we are finding all these things in criminal justice reform is because people are now looking, you know what I mean? Like, we're like starting to see that there's gaps in the system and biases and discrimination and all that stuff. And I mean, I've only been doing, I found that in the first year And so I feel like all systems in North Dakota, whether it's state or federal, or, and I'm not just talking criminal, right? I'm talking agriculture, energy, all that stuff. I think that there's a lot of gaps in a lot of systems. And if we had more people that were like looking, we'd probably have some really good engaging conversations about change. But for me, you know, there's you got mugshot reform, criminal record seals, expungements. You know, one thing that's came to my attention more recently is the cost of being able to communicate with people in prison or jails on phones, right? It's like $3 a minute or something like that, right? And I think, and there's kickbacks that are happening where the state of North Dakota Department of Corrections and the jails get money back from those telecommunication companies for, you know, how much people use phones. And, you know, I think I saw a $7,000 check. I mean, it's all on the internet, and it got sent to me by an attorney in Fargo. And the people who are paying for those are not the guys that are sitting in jail. It's the families, the people who have not committed a crime or been convicted of a crime are having to deal with the barriers of communications just so that daughters can continue to talk to their dads, right? Or moms still wanting to talk to their sons, or vice versa with women. I mean, 15 years ago, we had like 40 women in prison, and now we have 400, right? At one time, it may still be possible, but at, you know, a few years ago, per capita, North Dakota was the 4th fastest growing prison system in the nation, right? And that's why all this funding came to, you know, companies like F5 for Free Through Recovery and Community Connect, is that the prior administration for North Dakota, before Governor Burgum, had started this justice reinvestment, where they were going to allocate money from the DOC to the Behavioral Health Department. And it worked. It signed off with Burgum. And they allocated $7 million to start because they didn't want to build another prison. So I will give benefit to the doubt for, you know, both Democrats and conservatives in North Dakota that they're trying to reinvest into the community by creating these peer support programs. But prior to that, we became the 4th fastest prison system for a reason. The war on drugs, mugshots, record seals, homelessness. You know, it's no easy feat to become the 4th fastest growing. And so, so my focus on is just try to eliminate barriers for change. I think phone calls in prison is very important, especially if you're talking to family members and mentors and religious people and, you know, people that can help you change. Because if you're only talking to people in prison, then hopefully you find someone who's good in there. But if I know anything like I do, when you take a bunch of people from a trap house and you put them in a trap house, not a lot of good decisions are going to be made without some kind of person that you can put in there to help curate that change. And so we need communications. We need it cheap. We need it reliable. More technology in the prison so that people can learn and be educated and get degrees. I view prison as a place an incubator where people can go to become different, not go to become worse. And otherwise we're just curating crime and creating better criminals, if that's the case. And if that's what we're trying to accomplish, then yeah, hire more cops. Yeah, hire, you know, put more body cams on, you know, all that stuff. Or we can go up the river and do some prison reform and create more programs and more funding and more degrees and better communications so that people can change. So.
Well, you know, I got into a political argument a couple of years ago. They were going to put some money into a technical program in the Bismarck Penitentiary to teach inmates how to build while they were in jail. And I thought, what a great opportunity. And the argument, of course, was met with the fact that they would be working for pennies on the dollar. And this was, you know, an unjust labor. But I thought, when these people get out, they're going to need to enter that workforce. And if they can, you know, frame a house, build a deck, then, you know, all the better to them. Really quick, we had a question. Adam, what impact does a prosecutor's office have on the community and reform?
I've had an interesting relationship with prosecutors, you know, throughout the last 5 years. Prior to that, you know, they just made sure I was held accountable and was locked up, you know, so it was a kind of an adversarial, you know, like I said, relationship. In the last 5 years, I've came across a few prosecutors that on both sides, right? Like I've came across some ones that are very punitive and do not care, right? All they care is the letter of the law. And so much so that I've seen them show up at testimonial hearings to ensure more punitive laws, right? Thinking that it's going to create public safety. On the other side of that token, I've experienced a few prosecutors in the state of North Dakota that believe in recovery, believe in reform. They are doing their best to help change the system to create, you know, a little bit of grace, some opportunities and accountability all in the same token. It's not an easy feat, especially when we're in a state that's been very punitive towards drug addiction for a long time. But how they do that is not necessarily just changing the law. They do it through creating opportunities through one aspect that we have for bail reform is that we have drug court, right? Or prison reform is drug court, where people, if they complete drug court, they can have their felony dropped down to a misdemeanor or dropped off, right? And I see, and it's a volunteer program, both for the person who is in drug court and the people who are serving as the prosecutor, the judge, the whatever. And so there are people that are serving as prosecutors in those drug courts, and they are very community and recovery minded, and not minded in the sense like, if you use drugs, you're going to jail. It's like, all right, you relapse. What can we do to connect you to people, or what can we do for treatment or whatever? They became navigators for a health system rather than a prison system, right? And so that impact of seeing, like, if I have a prosecutor who's speaking into my life and believes in me that I can change, is much different than a prosecutor who gives me no time of day. And that impact alone, I've watched addicts' lives and perspectives change to where they think that they're valuable, right? And it brings self-esteem, that because if this prosecutor believes in me, maybe there is something that I can, maybe there's something that I should be believing in too, right? And it produces effort, and it produces, like, you know, a second chance, and second chances create more equity, social equity, than anything that we can do to mandate or criminalize or felonize across the board. And so I think that there's more power in some days in a prosecutor speaking life into an addict than there is for me doing it.
Certainly. Awesome answer. Thanks for the question and thanks for the answer. Hey, you guys, we went a little bit long. Typically, I like to wrap these up at 12:45. We're a little late. Like I said, this is really designed to hit that lunch hour. But Adam, do you want to end on any words of your own, or do you have any knowledge you want to drop on us before we wrap up?
I'll tell you, I've been watching the environment of politics of North Dakota for a long time, and a lot of it is it's built on name recognition, right? And most of those people that have name recognition, I don't see them do shit in the community. And so I think one reason why F5 and some of the people that work here have more name recognition than most of the politicians in North Dakota is because of the work that we do in the community, even on our free time. And so I know it sounds selfish that you're going and working in the homeless shelters because you want to get name recognition, but sometimes we have to, like, eat crow, right? And look like we're doing it for selfish reasons for the overall plan of making a better community. And so I would implore you that if you are interested in running, or you are, or you have ran, or you're being reelected, that you should spend more time in the community and get to know your community and get outside of your comfort zone and get a little bit of ugly grace in your life. And I think that you'll have much better results than going up against a person that just has a little bit of name recognition. So.
I love it, Adam. I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for your words of wisdom. Thanks everyone for coming. And I guess until we see each other again, stay warm and stay healthy. I appreciate you all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Adam.
And you're